Academia is a pretty hierarchical culture where you as a grad student are, closer to the bottom of that hierarchy. And the vibe you're getting, even if not outright messaging that you're getting, although sometimes it can be outright messaging, but if the vibe that you're getting from them is like, oh, it's such a shame, what a waste, it's too bad, you do such excellent work, all these things which kind of sound innocent, but they're very morally value laden, right? They're very heavy. They have an emotional weight to them. And it becomes really challenging for the student who has been in a system where they've, probably in some ways looked up to their mentor, quote unquote. They're feeling very vulnerable in lots of different ways. It becomes real difficult to do that true career exploration, that true personal exploration and discovery to figure out what would suit you when you've kind of eliminated almost all the options right off the bat as being morally suspect, ethically negative. Are you a failure? Are you considering selling out? Is the only thing you care about money?
Welcome to this new episode of Papa PhD. Today I have the great pleasure of having with me Jennifer Polk. Jen Polk is a career coach and educator. In addition to her work with individuals, she regularly facilitates professional development workshops and delivers presentations for graduate students and postdocs. Jen currently serves on the board of director of CAGS, the Canadian Association for Graduate Studies. She earned her PhD in history from the University of Toronto. If you visit her website, From PhD to Life, you'll be able to read her writing and learn more about her other services and activities, always around this question of figuring out the post-PhD career conundrum. Welcome to Papa PhD, Jen.
Yeah, thank you. I'm super happy to be here. Yay, finally.
Yay. Yes, well, when I started this, you were already, for me, in the constellation of PhD career people out there. And so it always felt like, no, I'm not in the position to invite her, et cetera. And I'm super thankful that you actually, in a conversation, you said, no, sure, I'd be happy to. And now we're here having this conversation, and I'm really honored. And so it took some time, but also, you know what? Now you're like episode 1 of season 4, so it's special for you too.
Yeah, love it.
So, Jen, for people who don't know you, because it's true that you're known in this space, but maybe and probably some listeners of Papa PhD won't have heard of Jen Polk. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Paint a little wider picture of who Jen Polk is, apart from what I just mentioned.
Yeah, so I'll start narrow.
Yeah.
And the narrow sentence is that I help PhDs get clear on their career path, so figure out, what direction they want to go in, so that they can then confidently market themselves for jobs they actually want. So yeah, that's the narrow bit. But I'm all over this topic of what happens after a PhD. And although my own academic background is in historical scholarship, I finished 10 years ago, and since then I'm engaged in these conversations of PhD students and postdocs and academia writ large across all kinds of disciplines, all over the world, although, primarily US and Canada. But it's actually really exciting for me. I've learned so much more about all of this stuff after my PhD. And I'm self-employed, and you already mentioned my business name, From PhD to Life. And yeah, I live in Toronto, and I have my cat Izzy, and if you follow me on Twitter, you might have seen her.
Yes, actually, I'm fiddling here because something I should have done before, but this has been a busy day. I'm going to do some StreamYard magic here and do this. Boom. From PhD2Life.com and at From PhD to Life. So easy. It's the same thing.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. I'm also on LinkedIn, not with that name. And you can find me Jennifer Polk, PhD on LinkedIn, and I've got a Facebook page as well that's also From PhD to Life.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that what you mentioned about growing what you knew about this question after your PhD, and of course it's been the same with me. Like each conversation widens my knowledge of people's stories, of people's common fears, common blind spots, and I I understand how that might have happened on your side too. But one thing that I might want to ask to bring us to your journey is maybe just to ask that question of what drew you to go for a PhD in the first place.
Oh boy. Yeah, there's lots of ways to answer that question. So one version that is true, there's lots of true ways to answer that question. But one true story is that I did a master's degree in history, and that's very common in Canada to do, a separate MA before a PhD. It's almost required up here. So I did a 2-year MA. It had a thesis component. So I did archival research and, wrote a long thing. You can't see me, but if I move slightly, you can see the red book on my shelf behind my shoulder this way.
Oh, I see it.
Yeah. There you go. The red one. And that was the best thing I'd ever done. It was the most challenging thing I'd ever done and the most rewarding. So I was so excited to keep going, to enter into a PhD program and to shift my topic slightly, and to work with a world famous scholar whose books you could buy in airports and, bookstore, just regular person bookstores. And so I was really excited. So, that's certainly, there's, I could go on and on and on, but I think that is a true story to tell. I was really thrilled to start a PhD.
Mm-hmm. And so, for you, when did the realization come of, okay, I did this PhD, or I'm finishing this PhD, but first I'm not sure I want to go for a postdoc. And then that has the ramifications that we know. And then what's out there for me? What was that juncture like for you?
Yeah, so there are postdocs in history and humanities disciplines, but it's actually really common. I think it's more common for folks to go straight into assistant professor positions. If they get them. So I think there was no moment where I was like, no, I don't want this. But it was more, there were points where I reflected on things that I had and hadn't done in the past. And when I remembered those experiences, when I reflected upon them, it was like, oh, that's telling, right? And if I added up all of those reflections, it was sort of like, maybe this is telling me something. So let me say specifically some examples here.
Yeah.
So as I was getting ready to defend my dissertation, I was supposed to submit, all I had to do was write 150 words. And because I was going to be part of a roundtable with other scholars. We were all really junior folks. And finally, we were going to all be at a conference together, presenting on really a kind of a new subfield that we were all part of. And this was a conference that I'd been to previously, I'd presented at previously. And so that all of the things pointed to, yes, awesome. This is exciting. And all I needed to do was write 150 words. And I'd just written an entire dissertation, right? Like I was ready to defend it in a month or two. This was easy. I could not make myself do it. I could not make myself do it. And I didn't end up doing it. I withdrew. So that's an example of one of those moments where it wasn't in the moment where I was like, that's it, I'm done. But it was later looking back where I was like, oh.
That's what was happening.
Yeah. So there were things like that. I didn't apply for postdocs, that fall. I had put that off. Right? I didn't apply. I was like, oh, I'll just do it after I defend. And, it just never happened. Right.
Yeah.
And at a certain point I was like, well, okay, maybe I'm not actually that keen on this. Maybe I want to explore other things. I don't know what else is out there, but maybe there could be something that would suit me.
One thing that's very important to me, or that's really telling and that resonates with me a lot in what you said, even before you gave the exact example that you said some things happened that I then, looking back, felt that they were telling, and they should have kind of foreshadowed what I had then realized later on. And I do think that there's so much, or there can be so much discourse that you get from the outside. Say, no, this is the way to go. This is what you need to do. This is the timeline to follow. That often people might end up not listening to themselves, and it could be, not like you said, not being able to write 150 words, which was, you could of course do it with the blindfolded, whatever. But it could be physical. You could, if thinking about, I don't know, submitting for or applying for a postdoc, it could give you a stomachache. I don't know. It could declare itself in different ways. And I do think that this thing of what are your feelings telling you when no one's sending you messaging and sending you calls to action to this or that. And I don't know if I don't have maybe you do, an exercise or a way to kind of dampen the messaging from outside, and to be able to be in this space of, okay, I'm going to listen just to myself now, and that's going to tell me what to decide. Is this something you've approached with some of your trainees or mentees?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. It's a big part of my work with clients. Often people hear about what I do and they think, oh, she helps people write resumes, right? Or maybe helps people like find jobs, tell them what job titles they should look for. And that's, no, actually. Maybe sometimes, I have suggestions, whatever, but actually really important to my work is giving space, providing a space for folks to really get in touch with themselves. And that sounds like a bit silly and life coachy, but it's actually super important because exactly as you say, there's these constant, messages and narratives, this culture that we live and breathe, the Kool-Aid that we've all drunk, right? To use that expression. And it's kind of shocking actually, but to take a step back and say, oh, actually, what do I value? What is important to me? What do I want? Those are the real beginning of a job search, even though most people wouldn't think that those were part of a job search, but that's the foundation of a job search. And I know, we scoff at universities giving mindfulness training, and there's reasons why we scoff for that, right? Because that's not a solution to the systemic problems, but it can be part of the solution for an individual person. If I can say that, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Anything that brings you closer to your core should or might help. But I think what you said in what you offer is interesting, and I know that you do some group discussion sessions. I've been in one, and then with subjects, and it's really interesting. And I imagine that doing that with other people, there's a little plus to that. Being in the safe space with other people that are also figuring things out and questioning things that they hadn't before in the safe space. You must have witnessed aha moments of different people in the groups that you coach and that you mentor, let's say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people are nervous about the idea of a group coaching. There's other group contexts. The one you were on was not a group coaching context, but I think there can be some nervousness around that. But I've experienced over and over again that actually, it's really incredible. the group experience, because other people inevitably have experiences that will resonate with your own, even if you're you're doing quite different things. I think it reminds me of the value of community, which I think is also what you're talking about here.
Yes.
Is
Yes.
Community is so important, and it's something that I think academia in general doesn't value as much. I speaking, writ large. There might be some pockets of it for sure. And a lot of students are feeling really isolated in programs. Even folks that would surprise you about, people that work in labs, you would think in busy research groups, but they, depending on the situation, can also feel really isolated.
It's true. And it's funny. I've heard you hear in other contexts talk about this thing of rugged individuality. And in my experience, in my PhD experience, I feel that was kind of the culture that was promoted in a way. So yes, you're in a group. Yes, you're in a research group, but you're expected to be this rugged individual, and of course, your PhD, your thesis needs to be your work. There's no question there. But it's funny, I made a video about that, how I believe that a PhD should be a village in a certain way. You know how they say it takes a village to raise a child? I think, between mentors, between peers in other domains, coaches, and whatever enriches and uncovers blind spots as you go is going to be helpful. And also security nets, like emotional security nets, mental health security nets, etc., etc. Super, super important.
Yeah, absolutely. There's the mythology of the lone scholar in an ivory tower is like not borne out by reality.
No,
maybe the mathematicians, I'm not sure, but I don't know.
Jen, on your website, there's content, there's the different types of support you offer. You're very, very generous of your time. You chose a path of being with people to help them directly, and which I really admire, and I think is very reassuring to have the person with you versus watching a video or whatever. And I'm not saying I don't know all that you offer, and you might have some pre-recorded stuff, but I know that a lot of what you do is one-on-ones and groups, and you're there with them, and I really, really, really like that. So from PhD2Life.com, you can go there. You can also follow her on Twitter at from PhD to Life. Now, why we're here today is because you brought me this question, which I was like, oh my God, yes, we need to talk about this. Which is the question of, are you a sellout if you leave academia after your PhD? And it's kind of a question that's looming and that's out there in the ether, and that affects people. And I'm thinking of myself. I didn't have role models like in my family who had gone to through higher education until the PhD. So everything was new to me, and I didn't know. I didn't have examples. So because I didn't have examples of people who had gone up to there, I didn't have examples who have transitioned to there to something else. So of course there was this sense of, maybe the word is betrayal in a way. And I remember having questions. It's like, oh, well, but you studied all these years and now you're leaving. What sense does it make? And and even like, so all the scholarships that you received, isn't it unfair that now you're just going and doing something else? So this is a question that you've heard and that is out there too, right?
Definitely. And it's one that I experienced for myself. So yeah, I lived that question for sure. It's, I think it's not every single person will resonate with it, but yeah, as you say, it is in the ether. And I think enough people experience it in enough of it anyways, that they'll know what we mean.
Yeah. And so how can this question affect negatively the power of decision, like the agency of a young researcher who wants to decide to take a decision on their career without any guilt, without any negative emotions?
Yeah. So, of course, I'm speaking generally, always. Don't at me, as people say on Twitter. And, academia is a pretty hierarchical culture, where you as a grad student are, closer to the bottom of that hierarchy. And the vibe you're getting, even if not outright messaging that you're getting, although sometimes it can be outright messaging, but if the vibe that you're getting from them is like, oh, it's such a shame, what a waste, it's too bad, you do such excellent work, right? Like all these things which kind of sound innocent, but they're very morally value laden, right? They're very heavy. They have an emotional weight to them. And it becomes really challenging for the student who has been in a system where they've, probably in some ways looked up to their mentor, quote unquote. They're feeling very vulnerable in lots of different ways. It becomes real difficult to do that true career exploration, that true personal exploration and discovery, to figure out what would suit you when you've kind of eliminated almost all the options right off the bat as being morally suspect, ethically negative.
All the way to a failure.
Yeah, are you a failure? Are you considering selling out? Is the only thing you care about money?
I don't know if you want to talk about, you just said money, and it's really a weird conversation sometimes to have. And I've seen recently conversations about, money shouldn't be top of mind if you're going to do a PhD, because this thing of selling out, just the word selling out. So it's kind of, you're being bribed from this big bad wolf to leave the straight path. And people need to live and pay bills and pay debts if they have debts. So maybe in your group sessions, or maybe just in your reflection and in preparing materials, have you approached this question of how skewed or valuation of our time as PhD researchers is, and how we kind of need to reframe it and kind of advocate for ourselves and say, yes, I deserve to aspire to a job that allows me to have this and this and build a family and that if you want a family.
It's a really messed up thing. And profs on Twitter, grad students sometimes on Twitter will say things outright like, "Oh, I don't do this for the money."
I've seen exactly that 2 days ago.
Right? Yeah, like we're not making it up, and it makes me burst out laughing, like you just experienced. But they're serious about it, but they're not thinking critically about it, because of course the money matters. Of course the money matters. If you're a professor, you get paid. You wouldn't do this if you got paid. If you're a grad student, unless you're the magical top 0.0 whatever percent, you need to pay, or you're living off your spouse or your parents who are getting paid, and they are financially subsidizing you. So money is always around. You need funding to do your experiments, etc. Anyways, I'm all of the scoffing and the eye rolling. It's very silly. It's very silly. And because there's this sense that academia and the university is somehow removed from capitalism, that everybody else is kind of in the muck, is sullied, but we are pure over here, right? We're pure, we're separate. Again, it's this ivory tower on a hill mentality, and it's just silliness. It's just total silliness, because universities are giant corporations. So many of them, for tax purposes, are nonprofit corporations, but it's a tax status. It's not a moral ranking, right?
I totally agree with you, and it's interesting what you said about maybe your parents are subsidizing you, etc., etc.
And that's fine if they are, but like, let's be real about the situation.
Yeah, someone is bankrolling, the thing, and you hit the nail on the head with what you just shared. But let's say our listeners are mid PhD, I don't know, third year, fourth year, and we wanted to like in these like 10-ish minutes that are left of our conversation, we wanted to awaken in them a kind of sense of what my time is worth. Because one of the things that I felt, at least during PhD, was that I needed to not value my time at zero. Why am I saying this? Because I was asked to, or expected, or I put myself also on myself the expectation to do the things, no matter what time it needed to, what time was needed, what amount of time was needed to do them, and at what time. Because let's say Christmas time is worth more, let's say, but the mice are born on Christmas, so I need to go take care of them on Christmas Day, and etc., etc., etc. How can we prepare people who are at that middle section, let's say, of the PhD, to say, okay, you have 3 years to understand that you need to think about your time differently, because once you're going to be looking for a position and interviewing for a job, they're going to be evaluating, they're going to be putting a value on your time, and if your tendency is to really undervalue your time, you might accept a salary that's below what you deserve, for example. I don't know if you understand the problematic that I'm trying to bring here.
I think so, yeah. And for me, it's not just that you might accept a lower salary than you might get, but has broader implications for what kind of job you should get, and all of that. So my advice to that person would be to do some career exploration. What does that mean? Well, okay. First, I think it would be to get right in your own mind about, academic culture, and what are the messages that in your own mind and maybe swirling around you, from other people, right? So what is going on in your own mind in terms of thoughts and emotions? And in particular around this assumed binary, the one that, we can impose rightly or wrongly about academia versus non-academic, right? Just get clear about all of that stuff that's going on. Then you want to do some self-reflection. For example, what do you value? What are your top values? And you can go and Google, what are some values, right? You can find a list, but really, I do mean to ask it and have you not do any research, just to reflect for yourself. Okay, what do I value? What's important to me? What allows for me to thrive? Here's a question that I love asking folks. What are you doing when you're feeling most energized? Right? Any time of your life, right? It can be young, old, whatever, yesterday, 10 years ago, any context, grad school context, something totally beyond, hobbies, family life, whatever. What are you doing when you're feeling most energized? And don't say teaching. Don't say research. I mean, if that's the first thing that comes to mind, okay, more specifically, what parts of teaching, what parts of research? Okay, more specifically, right? I want you to really drill down into specific moments and answer that question multiple times. Then you start to get a real picture of who you are in the world when you're at your best. What are the situations that allow for you to be like really you, right? To kind of like take up space in the world, but in a good way, right? Not in a bad way. So anyways, all that self-reflection, and you can marry that kind of self-reflection with the more kind of hard-headed stuff, like what are my skills, and what software do I know how to use, all of that stuff too, of course. You might want to write a resume. It'll be a crappy first draft, but, just make sure that you have an accounting of everything. So not just an academic CV, but actual resume. So not only academic accomplishments and achievements, but all of the stuff that you've done. You won't show it to anybody, but just to have a very long, I call this an everything resume, a very long document that is for your eyes only. All right. Mm-hmm. So kind of get right in your mind, the self-reflection piece. And then the third step that I would recommend is to go and do research about what's out there. Now, I acknowledge at this point, you're still in a PhD program. You're still, going to the archives, doing your experiments, writing your chapters, right? Continue that. So I'm not suggesting that you stop. Mm-hmm. As you continue to do all of that, go and research what's out there. Yes, you can read job ad postings. You can read LinkedIn pages of companies. You can listen to podcast episodes, right? With interviews of people doing different jobs. But, and this is the important part, do some informational interviews. I think that is really, really key. Why I don't start with that is I want you to get some grounding in who you are first.
Of course.
Right? So that you can kind of make some determinations ahead of time and you can go into the informational interviews with less worry about shiny object syndrome, let's call it. If you're me, you do an informational interview and you get like super excited if the person you're talking to is excited and you want to do their job. But but that's why it's important to have done some foundational work so that, right, you don't informational interviews. We can talk more about that if you want, but just Google informational interviews. And then I think at that point, you might make some adjustments to your own PhD work. You can figure out like, can I do more of this, less of this? Maybe I want to alter this chapter in this way so that it can showcase more of my skills in that. Can I ask my PI for professional development funding to go and do this conference instead of that one? Starts to get really exciting here, right? So then, and again, this is not just about the money at all, but finishing your PhD really clear about what direction you want to take your career in, without even really trying, having built an awesome network of people that kind of know what you're all about and what you're looking for and who want to help you out. And when you graduate and by the time you want a job, you can start really searching and hopefully quickly be in the right place.
Very organically.
Yeah, exactly. And yes, it takes work, but this is work that, you've spent a few years on the side while you're doing everything else. And it's all kind of nicely integrated because none of that stuff is like in conflict at all with continuing to be a grad student. Does all that make sense?
It does make sense, but I would,
uh-oh.
Yeah, no. It totally makes sense to me, and it really aligns 100% with how I feel about this and the type of recommendations I give. But when I say you are trained, or let's say trained to not value your time too much, and to kind of become this monk or this nun, right? Like, and that your soul belongs to the monastery, and then there's no me time, and all that you've been saying takes me time. When do I when I do introspection? In me time. When do I do informational interviews? In me time. And again, depending on your relationship with your PI, depending on your type of personality, you might approach me time as kind of how do you say, when you skip school, as skipping school.
Yes.
And I want to find a way to tell people it's not skipping school. And you kind of said it. You said all of this that you're doing is going to pollinize your PhD too. And I think that's maybe I don't know if we can find a better way to encapsulate it. And I think you said it, or you described it, but don't take me time for introspection and for career exploration as skipping school.
And that's the first bit. I'm not expressing it very well, but of getting right in your own mind, of identifying those academic gremlins, those negative, right? That negative self-talk, those narratives, right? That's where you want to, because those beasts, those little assholes, they're gonna keep coming. But if you've already identified them, and if you've already kind of come up with tools to deal with them, and some talk back, then you'd be like, oh shit, that's that little asshole, that one.
I love the gremlins expression. I really love it. I'm going to steal it if you allow.
I'm borrowing it from other people too. Yeah. Academic gremlins, I always call these.
I love it.
And they're not just academic gremlins too, right? I think they're ones that come from culture. Different people with different positionality have their own, all these sorts of gremlins and narratives. And more generally in our culture, I'm an introvert and therefore I can't. I'm bad at networking. I could never have my own business. All of this kind of BS. I say lovingly, right?
It's lovingly, yeah, but I totally agree with you. And you kind of need to know your gremlins to then tame them, right? And what is it? You can't give them food after midnight.
Yes. So let me wrap this all up.
Go for it, because I wanted to loop back to what you offer, but go ahead. I'll let you wrap up.
Yeah, no, I think we're doing the same thing here. So all of that I've just described, let me give it labels. So I've described a 4-step process, and I call that the PhD Career Clarity System, PhD Career Clarity System. And it's prepare for action. And that's, often the mindset stuff.
Yes.
Put it simply. So prepare for action, focus on yourself. That's the self-reflection piece, doing the everything resume, etc. Identify possibilities. That's when you do the research, informational interviews, etc. Do you have any gaps? Do you need more training? Whatever. Then market to employers. You can't see my fingers, but that's the 4 stages. And a reminder here to folks that market to employers, when you write an actual resume for a job ad, when you write cover letters, when you worry about your LinkedIn profile, if you should be doing that, all of that, that's step 4. It ain't step 1, right?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And the thing that I would add to that is because, a PhD, well, depending on where people are listening from, but around the world can be from 3 to 7 years, whatever. But what I always suggest is if you can start this, I know year 1, it's difficult. You're starting, it's magical. But year 2, the earlier you can start, the better. And one of the reasons that I say, that I usually say is if you go have your first informational interview when you're already like hungry for a job, it's not going to be a good informational interview. It's the people are going to smell it. It's going to be transactional. You want something, and so anyway, I don't know if you have something to say on that, on the temporality of when to start doing these things.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, every single person is going to have to figure out their own, like, really specific job search strategy. Ideally, I'm with you. You should start early.
Ideally, yeah.
Ideally, yeah. But if if for life happens, we get it. Some people need to just get a job, any job. There's always time at that point, once you've got your basic needs met and you have some headspace for this stuff, to say, okay, let me take a step back, mentally, psychologically, and my next position, I want to get it right. So, of course, full respect for people, doing what they need to do.
Oh, yeah.
The ideal sometimes has to wait.
Yeah, patience. I also always recommend patience, and maybe going for something not as ideal first, and have it be a stepping stone for the next one. The thing where I wanted to loop back to you is all of this work that Jen is talking about, these four steps, they might be difficult doing on your own, and I think you'd gain by creating a small group of like-minded young researchers who are having the same questions and be accountability partners for each other. But then you also have, and because Jen is here today, people like Jen with From PhD to Life, who foster these discussion groups. Not all of them are coaching. The one that I was we were just discussing about, I think it was community building. But, if you find where in this universe of internet or campus, where is this safe space where you can have these conversations and not go it alone, because I think it's going to help you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. I would say for folks that are still grad students or if postdocs have access to resources on campus, please take advantage of that stuff. Check that out first, right? You kind of paid for it already with the fees and, or your PI did with the, tuition payments, whatever it is.
And once you're done, they're gone.
Probably they are. I have a resource for folks. I have a free resource that goes into more details about the PhD career clarity system and about more of the pitfalls that I see people come up against over and over again. That will also introduce you to my paid PhD career clarity program. So if you're at all interested in this, I'd love to hear from you and for you to join. No pressure, though.
How do they reach out to you to ask these questions? What's the best way?
Yeah, absolutely. So often the best place for people to start is my free resource. If you go to my website, fromphd2life.com, you'll find that. I tweet about it every day. It's on my LinkedIn. You can find it. Right. So I highly recommend that. But I'm always happy to get emails, Jen at fromphd2life.com, that Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever. If I don't respond, my email is a mess. Try me again. Right?
Yes. So what I'll do, Jen, is I'll take all these links and put them in the show notes so that people can click them and go land on your homepage and then find all of that. Jen, this has been a really great pleasure. These are not easy subjects, but it was fun discussing them with you. And I think, some of them are actually quite sensitive. This is like question of pay and money. And I think it's important to talk more about them. And also, in a light way. I don't think we went too dark on anything. But I think we did cover all the terrain that I was expecting and that I was hoping for. So thanks for having me on Papa PhD.
And anything we miss, I can come back for season 5.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. and also, if there's questions that you think we left out, you who are watching or listening, just drop them in the comments. Send an email to Jen or me, or a DM on our Twitter. It'll be a pleasure to follow up the conversation. This is what it's all about. The podcast is starting conversation. So. I'm sure Jen will agree that she'll be more than glad to receive more questions based on what we talked during this short 40-ish minutes.
Thank you, David, and thank you to your listeners. And congratulations on season 4.
Yay! Thank you so much.